way. Say in Africa or in New Guinea or the Australians, they would take the male out, not related people, unrelated males who were trusted in the tribe, would take the male out into the wilderness and honestly spend 3 days scaring the living bejesus out of him. He'd sit in a stone circle of rocks, and he was told that if he left the stone circle, he could never come back to the tribe. So he had to stay there in the stone circle. And they would probably feed him something that caused weird reactions. And they would scare him. They would make weird sounds and run around at night and just scare him. And he wouldn't be able to eat. There'd be no food, no water. And by the time this 3 or 4 day initiation was over, that kid was so glad to be alive, so glad to be back in his tribe. He never needed to test death again because he had been tested and he had survived. But in this country, this culture, if you tried to do that, you'd be arrested, for one thing. So don't do it, because they will arrest you if you try to do this to some kid. You know, take him out in the woods and scare the hell out of him. You will get arrested, okay? So you can't even do it. So, but what this does is that if you don't do it, then for the rest of that male's life, starting at about 12, and you who have sons know from whence I speak, that kid does nothing but test death. It doesn't matter if it's motorcycles, playing chicken, joining the military, taking drugs, guns, gangs. That's all it is. It's men who do not understand death, want to show they're not afraid of death, when actually they're terrified of it, and that's why all this is happening. And they're going to initiate themselves. And that's what's going on. That's what gangs are. That's what the gang initiations are. They don't know what they're doing. They don't have any link to great historical periods and culture, but they still know. They still know that they have to initiate these kids so that they will be part of their group. And what happens is you form a bond with those that initiate you. So the military boot camp is initiation. That's what you're doing to them. You're initiating them. You're putting them through, they have to sit, you know, with live fire going over their head while they're crouched to the ground. If they raise their head 1 inch, they're dead. Okay? That's initiation. Not good initiation, but it's initiation. And so we don't do healthy initiations anymore, and this is going to lead to the end of this age. This male energy left to just drive us all insane, and it will finally expend itself when they've all killed each other. Think about that. Unless we do something. Yeah. Oh, time to change the reel. Now we're at the end of the age. We're at the end. And it's this arrogance about it. Like, well, we don't need to know that. You know, everybody goes to college and they come out all pissy and arrogant, and they don't know anything. And it's pathetic. And I was listening to NPR a couple of weeks ago. It was really hilarious. And they had, I don't know, it was a Saturday show, and they had, you know, their educated commentator. And he said, well, we're looking at 2 people today. Bill from Philadelphia and Mike from New York. Now, Mike, tell us about yourself. And Mike, well, I'm a lawyer, and I practice corporate law and tax law, and what do you do, Mike? You know, oh, I'm a plumber. I can do construction and move stuff around. And then they brought this economist on. They said, which one of these 2 people? No, he says, dear Mr. Economist, I'm trying to talk Mike into going back to college so he doesn't have to fix things, so he doesn't have to move stuff, so he doesn't have to, you know, fix refrigerators and stuff, so he can be more like this other guy, you know, be a corporate attorney. Why don't you help me talk him into it? And the economist went, I hate to tell you this, but Mike, the builder, has a lot bigger future than the attorney. And I believe that. I believe the people that actually know how to do things with their hands, they're going to be the ones who survive what's about to happen. And all the etheric people with their jobs and their lawyer degrees and all that, they're not going to survive unless they go hang out with the people who are doing stuff. So, back when human beings first discovered agriculture, it was probably a woman, by the way, that discovered it. Somebody, at some point, dropped a seed, we just presume this, dropped a seed on the ground, wet ground, and came back 2 months later and there was a plant there. And they made the connection. Hey, wait a minute. I put that seed of that plant there, I came back 2 months later and here's the plant. That must be the seed that caused the plant to grow. Hence agriculture. Right? Well, these people then began looking into metals and saying, well, if there's seeds to plants, then there must be seeds to metal. And the very first founders of Egypt were called the Harem Heshu, and that means the sacred blacksmiths. And these were the founders of Egypt, and they were the blacksmiths of Horus. Why blacksmiths? Because blacksmiths were ancient alchemists. And they began bending and folding and cooking and boiling and stoking, anything they could, these metals, looking for the seed of the metal. I'm telling you all this so that when you get to the course on the elixir of life, you'll know more what it's about. Supposedly in the lore, they found the seeds of metal. And they planted the seeds of metal into other metal. And they were able to transmute metal with the seed. So you dropped the seed of gold into some boiling lead, and you walked away, and you came back a few days later, and it was all gold, because the seed had grown through the metal. And of course, science today is just like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. This guy must be insane. About 20 years ago, out in Arizona, there's this guy named David Hudson. How many people know who David Hudson is? You know everything. Okay, David Hudson was a dirt farmer. You know what a dirt farmer is? Dirt farmer is a guy who has a farm that doesn't have any usable dirt on it. So he has to make his own dirt. Okay? Arizona, everybody's a dirt farmer. So what they do is they spend 3 or 4 years making their soil before they start growing the food in it, because it's a high selling content, right? And a lot of calcium. So David Hudson's a dirt farmer. Very smart dirt farmer. And what they did was he would take huge amounts of rocky soil and cook it under high temperatures and then throw it back on the ground and do this over and over until he had 400 acres of it. Well, he found this rocky black stuff, didn't know what it was, and he put it under a high arc welder, which is what he was using to break the soil down, which is a ship welder. You ever seen them? There's these ship welding things that weld ships together, and they have like 150,000 volt arc, blistering arc. You can't even look in it. And it takes tons of energy to do it. And he blasted this stuff. And he looked down, and he got done blasting. There was all this white powder all over, this black calcite. And he went, well, that's strange. So he scooped up some of the white powder, took it to the University of Arizona, asked them to do analysis of it. They told him it was iridium and rhodium, very rare elements, actually very expensive elements. I don't know what iridium goes for an ounce, but it's really expensive. And he said, really? I can get iridium and rhodium out. I can become a billionaire from this. They said, yeah. So he got really excited. That's why I trust him, by the way, because he was trying to make a buck. And so he went and he scooped up more and zapped it and got more white powder and thought he was in the business of creating iridium and rhodium and going to sell it on the rare metals market. And so he took this batch and they said, This doesn't show up as anything. He said, wait a minute. You did a spectral analysis of this and it doesn't show up as anything? He said, no, it doesn't show up as anything. It's impossible. So he went back and he got the original white powder, and he took it and said, well, analyze this again. Tell me if it's still iridium. He said, the analyst said, no, it's not iridium anymore. It was iridium 2 months ago, but it's not iridium anymore. So he got really freaked out, and he started doing everything he could, because nothing, it's impossible that something can be nothing. So he began zapping at this stuff and looking at it. He began noticing that its weight would change. Sometimes it would be a certain weight, and then he would measure it 2 hours later, and it would only be half of that weight. Same stuff. And he went to all these scientists and all these metallurgists, and nobody could explain it to him. Then he began looking at this white powder, and he began noticing that it was superconductive. Superconductive means you have your load end on a wire, and you have your source of power. You start your source of power, say a generator, runs down the line, starts up your drill, say, or your light. From the time that it enters the copper wire to the time it gets to the light, it has lost a lot of its original energy because the wire resisting the electricity uses up a lot of power, right? So the time it gets to the light, only about half the power that you had at the load line gets there. That's called resistance or impedance. But he noticed that if you made a wire out of the white powder and you put it on the load, 100% of the energy got to the other side. As you age, your electromagnetic field, your pineal gland calcifies, and you get more and more resistance in your electromagnetic field until it begins slowing. It starts going incoherent, wobbling, because there's no longer an anchor holding it to your spinal column. Sick people will frequently have their field out over here, coming down and incoherently trying to find its way into the pineal. Hudson realized that, wow. Well, he didn't realize this. I guess the alchemists that were surrounding him realized it. They said, wow, this might be the secret of alchemy. Because if you took this superconductive metal, your system would come back into balance, and you would be like you were 16 years old again. And so people began working on it and studying ancient alchemical texts. And we find that the philosopher's stone is white. It's a white powder, a white stone. And when you take it, the alchemists say that it creates a illuminated body or a luminous body. When we were in Peru shooting Time Wave 2013, we interviewed the shamans in Peru. And they told us that when the Spanish came, they escaped up to 20,000 feet to get away from the Spanish who were killing everybody in sight. And, and they took their secrets up there, and they stayed there. The Spanish didn't like the cold weather or something, let them stay up there.